Hey, welcome back to another episode of Ecommerce on Tap, brought to you by Sourcify and ISBA. I'm your host, Nathan Resnick, joined by my co-host, Aaron Alpeter. Aaron, how's it going today?
I'm good, Nathan. How are you? Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween. So for those that are tuning in for the first time, you want to give a quick overview of what Ecommerce on Tap is?
Yeah, so what we do is we pick an interesting company, typically an e-commerce venture-backed company, and we tell their founding story, reverse engineer their supply chain, and then talk about their exit potential. And so it's been a lot of fun just really learning, and we're excited for people to join and learn with us.
Yeah, I think my favorite episode is Liquid Death, which like for some reason I always drink when we record these. I just love it. What has been your favorite so far?
Gosh, I think the ones I go back to, the Timu one was very interesting. I thought Merit Beauty was great. Farmer's Dog, obviously one that's close to my heart. So I, there, I don't know. It's like picking which kid you like, and you know the answer, but you don't want to say it out loud.
Yeah, exactly. Well, today we're covering Not Standard. And before we dive into their story and their background and their growth, was there any kind of interesting tidbits that you wanted to share from the past week that you saw?
I had a very interesting week last week. So we had our annual ISBA retreat. So we're a remote team, and once a year we all get together in some place in the U.S. And so we've been different places. And this year we were in Austin, Texas, and we decided to go to the Tesla factory. So we were able to get a connection to get in there. And have you been to an automobile factory, let alone a Tesla factory before?
I haven't. No, I'm super curious how it is.
It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. If you're a factory nut like me, it was just like Disneyland. And it was funny. I walked in and I immediately started to do my checks to see like how well put together it was. You check the you know are there vermin traps in the corner? Is it dusty up top? Those sorts of things. But I walked away with a couple of interesting pieces. Uh, the first one was that cars obviously are very complex to build, and they have done something that I think is pretty remarkable. And they've taken a good chunk of the automotive supply chain and they've put it under one roof. So they make their batteries in house. They do a lot of their parts manufacturing in house, and a lot of that was out of necessity because when they were going about and creating the initial Tesla models, they didn't have suppliers that they could tap into, and it didn't really make sense to pay them money, pay them margin to figure it out, and still not be exacting their standards. So they took the hard way to get to something very interesting. But that was one thing. It's just kind of how vertically integrated they are. They're not making tires internally, so like there is some stuff that they're bringing in. But the other part that was really interesting was how quickly they built this factory. Uh, they built it, so from groundbreaking to first production was only 14 months,
Wow.
which is pretty shocking. I didn't know that we could do things in 14 months in America. And for record, it only took 11 months for China to build their gigafactory. And so, way to go, Texas! You're kind of on par with China from factory building. But the probably the most interesting thing that I walked away from was their manufacturing process. And the part that really stood out to me was there's a part in the line where they're obviously bending and welding and assembling the body, and then they send it out to a paint line. And basically, what was interesting to me was that they were not making all the white cars at one time. They were actually changing the paint color based off of the VIN that had been ordered. And so for Tesla, they're lucky enough to have more demand than they have supply for right now. And so when they start to build something, they know exactly what the VIN number is going to be, exactly what the customer is ordered. And so they've built their process in such a way that, if Nathan ordered a blue car, you get a blue car. And if Aaron ordered a red car, he gets a red car. And that's just the way it comes off the line. And so you think about the efficiency that they had to be able to figure out in order to have postponement in such a way that you can really be building in a unit of one, still in an assembly line, was just really, really interesting. So this is getting close to turning into a Tesla episode, but suffice it to say, I really enjoyed the factory.
That's awesome. That's super cool. Yeah, I would love to go check it out. I think it's just incredible what Tesla has done, and just to hear that they were able to build that manufacturing facility in 14 months, like that's insane. I mean, that's really remarkable. What caught my eye is Keurig, Dr. Pepper, KDP acquired a 60% stake in the energy drink company Ghost for $990 million. And they'll probably purchase the remaining 40% in 2028. And so it's just a pretty, incredible story. Founded in 2016, now having basically $1 billion exit. And KDP also owns a 30% stake in C4 Energy. So for those listeners that hit the gym, I think most people know what C4 is, and probably a few know what Ghost is as well. And it's pretty interesting to see that Keurig Dr Pepper's leaning pretty hard into this energy drink space, and I think it was a remarkable outcome for the Ghost team.
Yeah, are you an energy drink drinker, or did you just stick to Liquid Death?
I do drink pre-workout most of the time. So yeah, I mean, it's the pre-workout market's so interesting. You have some like creator-led brands like Gorilla Mind that we should probably do an episode on sometime, and then you have like C4 Energy, which has been around since I was like basically like, I don't know, probably in middle school or high school. I think that company C4 Energy's probably done, I don't know, billions, if not even 10 plus billion in lifetime sales. I mean, it's pretty incredible. But yeah, that'd be a fun episode to cover. And yeah, it's interesting when you ask like a gym goer, do you use pre-workout or not? I think there's a mixed standard now.
Yeah, I'm lucky if I remember to eat before I go to the gym. So there's
Yeah. Well, today we're covering Not Standard. So for those that don't know Not Standard, it is a luxury custom menswear company that specializes in bespoke suits, shirts, trousers, and accessories. I think a pretty interesting tidbit is the founders, met and kind of started in Dubai before, moving the headquarters. But I guess before we dive into Not Standard, Aaron, do you want to kind of give a background of the history of tailoring? And even before you do that, what's been your experience going to a tailor?
Yeah, I've been a couple times. Usually get suits adjusted, and it seems more often than not I'm getting them adjusted out instead of in. But it's been fine. It's been a unique experience that I probably remember the couple of times that I've done it. I think when I got married, there was a suit, so you want to get that tailored and looks nice and stuff like that. But I mean, you kind of go in, and somebody who you don't know kind of measures you in all the places that you don't want to be measured, and then says you're this big or this small, and then they take your clothes, and a week later you get what you need to. So it's been fine. But I don't know. How about you? Have you been to a tailor?
Yeah, I mean, I've been going to quite a few weddings recently, and so I feel like for everyone, I'm going to a tailor if I'm a part of the wedding party or whatever it may be. And I think, like you said, it's a fine experience. I think what I really love about past tailors I've been to is when I used to live in China and going to the markets and just getting like the most insane like custom suits for like $500 and like going through all the fabrics and picking out these like super cool designs. Like I remember I actually still have this suit and the inside has this like peacock like fabric and it's just like so cool. It's like a kind of like dark green suit with like kind of this like peacock green inside with like peacocks in it. It's I don't know, it's probably my favorite suit ever, honestly. But it's interesting, I think like a lot of, at least when I think of tailors, I think about my experience in China and through Asia and stuff, and going here to like Men's Warehouse is a lot different.
Yeah, I'm trying to picture you not in a sweatshirt and a hat, but a peacock suit sounds pretty cool. But that sounds amazing, and that's actually a pretty good segue into what we're going to talk about with Not Standard. But before I do that, I want to go through kind of the history of tailoring. And so you think about for the first 1,000 years or a few thousand years of modern humanity's existence, people were just kind of wearing clothes to survive. It was like, hey, I have this skin, I need to wear something because it's cold, and I don't really care what it looks like. It's really about function. That's really the purpose of that. That started to change a little bit in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, where for the first time on a pretty large scale, you had very wealthy individuals who hired people that were skilled garment makers. And so they were trying to still, they wanted to emphasize the function of the garment, but they said, hey, make it look nice, do the stitching this way, or, maybe add a couple different types of animals or colors or things like that. Well, modern tailoring really got its start in medieval Europe. So I think 5th to 15th century. And this is where garments were regularly custom made for nobility. And, I was in London a couple weeks ago. And so you go to some of these museums and you just see these really decadent and amazing dresses or just suits that people would wear. And they've got really fine stitching, unique fabrics. It kind of sounds like your peacock suit. back in the day. But that was really where I got started. Is that this was something for rich people to do, and it was I'm going to signal my wealth, not by just being warm or comfortable, but by looking a certain way. And then in the 15th and 18th to 18th century, so think Renaissance, this is where fashion became a status symbol. So if you've ever seen Bridgerton, think like Bridgerton, and how big the dresses are, and those sorts of things. This is where clothes were highly individualized. You had some structured garments that were that you had a pattern, but everything was molded to that person individually and precisely. And you started to see really exotic materials like silk, velvet, that were pulled into these custom creations. And it wasn't uncommon for people to really fight over or steal garments from someone after they passed on. So, it was one of the things that, if you inherit somebody, like, great, I get grandpa's clothes, which today you probably wouldn't do that. You'd be like, great, those are going to the thrift store, and someone else can do that. Well, that's kind of where clothing and tailoring was. And the pendulum started to swing a little bit with the Industrial Revolution. So think 19th century, and you start to have mass production of textiles. And people recognize that with the invention of the sewing machine, with the invention of patterns, it was actually much cheaper, much easier to create clothes that kind of fit everybody versus fitting one person precisely. And so tailoring still existed for the nobility. It was still very much a luxury, but you found that most people were now getting ready-to-make clothes. They didn't have to go to a tailor, and they just were able to wear those. And then we kind of get to the 20th century, and you've got rise of fast fashion in the 80s and 90s. That's really where customization kind of goes to the back burner in general. And in the last 10 or 20 years, you start to see things come back where we have produced enough of the gap where everybody kind of looks the same, and we know that there's in most cases 2 feet, 2 arms that go into clothing. But now there's a pullback where tailoring is becoming a little bit more interesting. And so there's some interesting technology, whether it be body scanning, 3D modeling, that is allowing people to start to do a little bit more customization with their clothes.
Yeah, I think it's super fascinating, and I think too now it's like, I don't know, I haven't worn a suit to like a business meeting in a really really long time, and I almost think like the script has flipped, and you've kind of like gone almost, I don't know if it's back in time, but the trend has just switched, and I think it's very rare you see someone like wear a suit to a business meeting in today's world. I mean, I remember being at like a tech conference like last year, and my buddy whose company is doing very well like showed up in just like athletic running shoes and like kind of athleisure wear, and I was like, oh, you kind of would you just roll out of the gym type of thing? And he's like, oh man, this is how you rock it. If you really already made it, you don't need to care about wearing business casual or whatever. And to his point, I think he was kind of true. I mean, he was just wearing what's comfortable to him, and that was his style, or that's his style, right? So I think it's kind of switched a lot, and I just wonder as a whole how that has affected tailors in general.
Well, I think it's a good point because there are designer sweatshirts out there. And so tailoring is just getting something that fits precisely to you. It's that individualized custom garment that is unique to you. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be a suit, but for all intents and purposes, if you're going to spend $100 or $200 on a tailor to fit something, you're probably not going to spend it on a $30 t-shirt. You're going to spend it on a $1,200 suit or those sorts of things. So I think it's interesting where people do want custom fit, and you think back to the True Classic episode, and one of their big insights was the unique aspect of their fit, where they can take people who maybe aren't as athletic as they would like to be or like to think they are, and put a shirt on that makes them look or feel more athletic or more built than they actually are.
Totally. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think too the technology in this industry has been pretty remarkable, right? I mean, there's so many different like 3D body scanning and virtual fitting type of tech. I know there's like a few Shopify apps that I think enable, fashion brands to kind of integrate virtual fittings like through your iPhone camera and stuff.
Mm.
I don't know their names off the top of my head, but I mean, if you think about virtual fitting and how that's affected the fashion industry, right? I mean, one of the biggest challenges there is returns. And if someone can actually, virtually try on this shirt or sweater or hoodie or whatever it may be before they buy it, I think in turn that would lower their return rate. So we'll see. And obviously a lot going on with on demand and made to measure production. A lot of different kind of AI driven and mass customization, which, I think is a cool idea, but for us in the supply chain world, I think super hard to do. Imagine you have like an AI driven wardrobe and you just kind of click to create. I mean, that's really hard to do from a supply chain perspective, to actually make those at scale.
In the current technology, absolutely. I mean, who knows if in the future we've got humanoid robots like I think what they call it, the Optimus ones that
Mhm.
Tesla had rolled out. Um, who's to say that you couldn't have a personalized tailor that's making or fitting things in the future?
Right.
But yeah, with the existing mass manufacturing framework we have, producing small MOQs is killer. I mean, how many times do you see an apparel brand come to you and say, "Hey, I'd like to make 10 of this T-shirt and 4 of this size and things like that." That's
Mhm.
just really really difficult.
Yeah, yeah, and I think too, on the other hand, right, there's been a lot of innovation in fabrics, and that revolves around 3D printing as well. I mean, if you go to any of these big, supply chain trade shows like the Canton Fair, I mean, they literally have like sections and sections of smart fabric suppliers that produce kind of geotech oriented type of material
Mm.
that you wouldn't think of because you're buying a jacket, but you think about, okay, that company that produces that jacket, they have a whole supply chain around those materials and smart fabrics, and it's pretty interesting. I mean, I had a friend that worked actually at a smart fabric factory, and I was just pretty amazed by the scale and volume that they do and the amount of innovation that they do to test. And you literally go into these booths and they have like hundreds of just like sheets of fabric, and you just go around feeling the different fabric and trying to understand like what's going to be best for this jacket. And it's pretty interesting. But transitioning to not standard directly, so the company was founded in 2012 by Matthew Mueller and John Bale. John has a finance background, went to University of Texas, got his MBA at Columbia Business School, then moved over to Dubai. He worked at the Abu Dhabi investment company, and spent 9 years as the CEO and co-founder of Not Standard. And so it's pretty interesting because he met his co-founder Matthew in Dubai. His background's mainly in product and IT. So he went to University of Virginia, and then managed a lot of different kind of information systems. Like he managed the information systems of Dubai Healthcare City, and has co-founded and now been the CEO of Not Standard for 14 years. And so, I mean, it's pretty interesting to see how John and Matt ended up starting a tailoring business, right?
Yeah, it's kind of a long thread or journey from, hey, I'm over there, I'm doing some finance stuff, to now I want to work on how people make clothes.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so I guess so. The name Not Standard, it's KNOT Standard. It's meant to transmit the fact that the consumer is also in charge of his look. There's a play on the word Not Standard, NOT. And so they say no two things will ever be similar. No two things will ever be standard. Um, I don't know. I want to spend a little bit of time on the name, right? Because in my opinion, if you launch a company and you have to, and there's like different spellings of the name, it's not a great name. And like,
Mm.
I think Not Standard has built a great brand here, but someone could think it's spelled NOT versus KNOT, and I mean, I don't know if you Google Not Standard without the K, does Not Standard come up? I assume they do, but still, I think in general, when I think about branding, I think that's a key question that any company should ask, right?
Yeah, I definitely see your point, and I kind of like it. I think it's kind of clever personally. I chuckled and I was like, "Oh, I see what they did there." But to your point, like, yeah, they're going to have to be more defensive on those unbranded key terms, and so maybe they're less efficient from a marketing spend point of view. But um, I don't know. Like, I think that it does allow you to start to have some interesting things with copy, where you intentionally use the KNOT instead of the NOT in some of the script that you write up. But
Yeah, and I
um,
think I'm I'm like a little bit of an outlier here because my pronunciation in general is like always horrible. But I think when you think about naming and just branding in general, it's an interesting dynamic, right? If someone can't like clearly pronounce it and spell it, it's like an added step, but maybe that helps them remember the brand, right? I don't know.
You're absolutely right. I mean, like I've known several founders that spent $50,000, $100,000 with branding agencies trying to come up with ideas, and they got something that was just right. And then you've got other founders like thinking back to the Thrasio episode that we did, where they're just like, oh yeah, sure, we'll call it this. And so I don't know, like it is possible to overthink it, but then it's also possible to underthink it at the same time. So I don't know. It's like, what's the right level of focus? Personally, I like not standard because it shows that it's more of an apparel thing. But I can see how people can get confused on it.
Yeah. So the founder spent 4 years living in Dubai from 2006 to 2012. Dubai was booming. There was a ton of business opportunities. And, with all these businessmen taking over the city, they, basically thought like there should be a better way to, create suits and get tailored suits. And so, in Dubai in particular, there was a ton of skilled tailors, but the cost of the garments was, also relatively affordable due to the lower labor costs and competitive market. But they
Kind of
noted
sound like
that,
China for you.
yeah, exactly. A little bit. I know I've never been to Dubai, but it's interesting to see their suit market. It might have been kind of similar. Um, and so they noted that the suit buying process was still really manual all over the world. And in the US specifically, they thought that they could make a difference by reducing prices and making their products more unique and more affordable. And so they first approached the idea to test it to create custom suits for themselves and close friends in Dubai. And that allowed them to understand the process and fabrics much better. And so right from the beginning, they looked to be a negative working capital company, meaning they were paid by their customers before they had to pay their supplier, which is like, the best place to be. I think very few companies are like this. And I think, as we look at so many different e-commerce brands, right, working capital is such a key. I mean, what's your take hearing that? Because I think that's a huge, opportunity that led to a lot of their growth.
Oh, it's a cheat code. It's absolutely amazing. I mean, if you can use your supplier's balance sheet to grow your business, or your customer's balance sheet to grow your business, all you have to do is just attract and retain, and it's pretty awesome there. I mean, you think about just the capital efficiency. If I need to, let's suppose it was the opposite, right? And I was going to be making these suits and holding them, I might need to spend $500 to $1 million in just inventory that may move this week or it may move next year. And so I have to raise money that I turn into inventory that I can't do anything with, and it just becomes a killer. Where if you know that you're being paid, and because they're being very intentional and bespoke about it, they're getting paid. They know exactly what the person wants. They make that thing, and then they maybe have like net 30, net 60-day terms with the tailor. Even if it's net 15, I mean, they're getting paid up front, and then they take care of it. It is an amazing cheat code, and they just grow perpetually.
Yeah, it's awesome. And so to tap into the larger U.S. market, the Not Standard moved its headquarters to New York City, and I think the founders really obsessed and kind of observed that consumers were seeking more personalized products and experiences, and this together with the rise of e-commerce and improvements in technology, helped them look into opportunities to scale out their tailoring. And so for the first 2 or 3 years, they didn't really guide their consumers on what to wear, but they soon, steered them to a point where the company was also able to provide guidance to their customers, kind of similar to Stitch Fix, which we covered, was that last week? I think we covered
Last
Stitch
week,
Fix,
yeah.
and it was, I think it makes a lot of sense. But today, if you go on their site, I mean, I'm curious, go to Not Standard right now if you're listening. Give us your take, but I guess, Aaron, I'm curious to hear your take on what their site looks like right now.
Yeah, honestly, I was impressed. And you start going around, and it looks like any other fashion-focused D2C site. It's highly curated. It's a beautiful site. They've got strong hero images that are highlighting different occasions, and it's very clear that they have a perspective about the aesthetic that they're going for. But you don't realize that it's different until you try to check out, because there are no prices on the website, and there's no way to purchase on the website. Instead, what you have to do is you have to schedule an appointment. And the thought is that you can either go into one of their stores and have somebody fit you, and then they'll make your clothes and then send it to you, or they they actually offer a virtual consultation. I think this virtual consultation is something they created during COVID, and it's really taken off and allowed them to grow. But all the data they're bringing in, all these insights that people are bringing to say, here's how I like to customize it, or here's the fabric matching that I like the peacock pattern or whatever. Those sorts of things are just super important, not only in them providing a good benefit to their customer, but it's something that allows them to potentially sell these insights to other companies.
Yeah, it's pretty unique in terms of how they do their fittings. And yeah, I mean, I was kind of surprised too not to see pricing on their site, right? You're kind of looking around and you think, okay, well, I wonder how this costs, and it kind of leads you through this funnel of scheduling an appointment to be fitted, which is pretty cool.
Which the more I thought about it, the more I like that approach, because they're not going after the cost conscious consumer, right? Like if you're looking to say, oh, I want the $15 thing, well, go to Temu, go to Shein, right? Go something that is not their customer. And so I kind of like the fact that they have recognized that they are serving people who want a personalized experience and a personalized product, and they're like making you go through this bit of friction in the buying process to get there. And the price of the garments kind of would be what you expect to be something that is unique to you.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit about their milestones, right? So they start in 2012. They raise seed round for 600K. They moved from Dubai to New York City. 2013, they raised 1.2 million from 3 investors. 2014, they raised 1.6 million from 1 investor. 2015, they do a seed round for 5 million led by Schwab Capital Management. 2016, they help introduce their 3D body scanning technology into showrooms. 2017, they do a Series A with Sunneed Partners. 2018, they do a venture round with Provenance for 15 million. 2019, another venture round with the Decathlon Capital Partners. 2021, John Bali, the co-founder, steps down as CEO. 2022, they do a venture round for 2 million. And then in 2014, their D2C business was sold to Billy Reid. And the expected revenue for their software side of the business this year in 2024 is expected to be $7 million. So I guess we don't really have exact numbers on how big their D2C business got, right? But from a software perspective, they're at a $7 million run rate this year, which, I mean, it's a hard business. The technology that they built out, having to sell to these different showrooms and tailors. I mean, it's not our typical kind of e-commerce business that we cover here. And so curious just to hear your take and thoughts as you heard that timeline.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because what they've done is they effectively decided to split their business and say that they were no longer going to sell clothes as a clothing company, but they were going to sell this technology. And I think it's an interesting kind of footnote in the moment that the ecosystem is right now, where there are lots of other companies that are looking at splitting off and doing less of the physical stuff and more of the technological stuff. And it's just, with capital being more scarce, with funding being more difficult, interest rates being higher, it's easier to scale and make a profitable software company than is a physical product. But yeah, I mean, it was an interesting kind of foray for how they started with one area and ended up in another.
Yeah, I agree. And so, I mean, in a regular store, you would get obviously measured by the tailor or the store clerk. On Not Standard, they basically use your webcam and their proprietary software to do the measurements. This process typically takes less than 15 minutes. If there's anything you don't like about the measurements, you got to kind of change those measurements and adjust, or are able to return the suit. And the definition of their custom suit is not just about the fit. It also includes the obviously materials and colors, and a name inside the jacket, or cuffs, or different types of cuffs. So there's a lot of options, which is, I think, hard to do from a supply chain perspective. But in the tailoring world, I mean, you can basically choose anything you want with a suit, so that makes sense. And I think the kind of main difference is that when you enter a store, the employees are actually stylists, highly trained to provide, their advice to customers. Whereas with this, it's more technology led. And so I think it's interesting. In their e-commerce site, if you go to notstandard.com, it includes, obviously suits, but also ties and shirts and blazers and, a lot of other formal type of wear. Um, and so it's interesting because all client information is stored on their digital profile. So it's hopefully kind of helping you increase your lifetime customer value, increase AOV, increase client retention. So that makes sense. I think most of their suits go from on the low end, $500 to, could be probably a few $1,000s per suit. And so it's a wide variety just depending on the customizations. And they also offer free altercations, for up to $100 if you don't, kind of like the fit and whatnot. So, I mean, it's interesting, but you think about this, you hear all this customization. I mean, to operate their supply chain is pretty tricky, pretty hard.
Yeah, and so this is the part that I think was interesting to me as we were digging into this. So I just want to paint a picture for a moment. The level of customization that they go through is pretty enormous. And so imagine this. You walk into a store, you do your virtual appointment, and you get to walk through 70 different possible customizations, over 7,000 fabrics, and 26 measurements to try to make sure you get the best possible, most custom garment to you. And so you think about this, 70 times 7,000 times 26 is a big number. And if you were to be in a make-to-stock environment, you'd have to make some amount of all of that inventory and put it in a warehouse somewhere. And so I think this is the genius of what they were able to do, is because they had intentionally said, hey, we are going to postpone the manufacturing process for as long as possible. We know that it's going to be more hand versus machine. We know it's going to be more expensive. But because we're able to do that, we are able to offer kind of an infinite shelf without taking that inventory risk ourselves. And that's the part that I think is just really interesting, is they said, okay, this is the thesis that we have. We're not going to make a decision to get into and say, we'll do custom and we'll do off the rack stuff. From what I can tell, they're really sticking to what they're able to do on that end. From a fabric perspective, they are working with some of the world's most prestigious mills. So if you know anything about apparel, you might have heard about Loro, Piana in Italy, Holland and Sherry out of the UK, or Demule in France. And so these are very well-known fabric houses or mills, and they have some high-quality traditional fabrics as well as some pretty unique ones, such as like a moisture-wicking fabric that could be helpful for a suit, or they actually have like leisure and athleisure now too, which I thought was interesting. I don't know if I would be willing to pay for like a custom tailored pair of pants just like to hang around the house. But maybe, I don't know, like I guess if I really liked it and I cared, but it's interesting how they're kind of branching out there. Yeah, anything stick out to you so far as like the mills, or just the fact that they've got such a high amount of SKUs that they're able to offer by this postponement?
Yeah, I mean, I think they must have some sort of like, warehouse that keeps the raw materials. And then, like you said, because they're kind of charging customers before they actually make these suits, it's obviously made to order, right? So they're able to have this amount of customization, this amount of fabrics, and, have made connections with fabric suppliers, really around the world.
And it's interesting because the way that they do this is so they have their stores, and they have 8 branded stores in the US, and they've got like 46 locations inside Nordstrom's that allow them to do it. And then, of course, you get your virtual appointments that allow you to see much more. But the way that they go about doing this is they have what they call master tailoring facilities around the world, which I imagine is a warehouse where they're storing a lot of this fabric. And they've got a lot of tailors in there, a lot of sewing machines that your order comes in. And just like my Tesla factory experience, they come in and they make your suit and only that suit, and then pass it on. And so it's just interesting how they've got these clusters of factories around the world where they're being sent and sent out there. I did try to call them this week to figure out where they were making them and where they're shipping from. I have not gotten a call back. If I hear back, maybe I'll add it to the show notes, or maybe they're listening and they know that it was going to put a podcast. But I don't know. I think it's just really interesting that they've got these clusters of customization around the world. When you look at their import records, they are sourcing some materials, mainly accessories and fabrics, from Asia. But by and large, they've got these really centralized places. I'm sure Dubai is one of the main manufacturing areas, just given their experience in Dubai, the tailors that are there, and then Dubai being such an amazing air freight facility as well.
Yeah, it's super interesting, and it's kind of ironic that we covered Stitch Fix last week, right? Because Stitch Fix is known to taking this like more algorithmic approach to styling. They're really using technology to style and have their algorithm to ensure or just kind of see what is best fit for customers. But a lot of customer feedback there is, hey, they felt like that they're appearing too generic, whereas here, Not Standard is super customized. I doubt any two suits are, the same. I mean, maybe once in a while, but overall it's super, super customized. Obviously more investment from the customer. But I mean, what do you think will win? And in my opinion, I think it's just a different demographic, right? The customer that shops at Not Standard is probably different than Stitch Fix.
I completely agree. And if you just look at the businesses from a financial point of view, Stitch Fix is doing, what do we say, like $1.2 billion in revenue, but they're losing 1 to 200 million a year. So much bigger company, not profitable. And then with Not Standard, we know that they're profitable, but they're not doing $1.2 billion in revenue. So there's a question here of like, which one would I rather own? And the answer is I'd much rather own Not Standard, because I would rather have a profitable business than unprofitable business. But what has the bigger upside? You probably have to say Stitch Fix if they can unlock that and make it work. Just because even if Stitch Fix's profit margin was 5%, well, 5% off of 1.2 billion is what, 60 million bucks. And so the thought there is like they're going to make more raw dollars than what Not Standard could as a much smaller company. So it is challenging, and I think that right now, well, you have to be profitable in order to have a future. And so if you look at it from that perspective, Not Standard is quote unquote winning. But I wouldn't sell my Stitch Fix stock just yet.
Yeah. I mean, and so from a exit strategy standpoint, Not Standard's D2C business has basically already been sold in April of this year of 2024. Billy Reid, which is a fashion brand with its roots in this industry concentrated in the southern part of America. They have a handful of stores across the U.S., a similar customer base, and so the two companies already had a partnership going on for the past year, where Not Standard provided made-to-measure support in Billy Reid's stores. And so, with this agreement, Not Standard has become a minority shareholder of the combined business. And so I think, it's a win-win for them. I think it helps Billy Reid's stores, and I think it was probably a good strategic move for Not Standard. But they also have this now kind of tech arm, which is estimated to do about 7 million a year in revenue this year. And so it's interesting to see where this will lead. I mean, which route do you think Not Standard is going to go, right?
Well, I mean, I think that what they did was actually pretty smart, because they're still retaining some exposure to apparel, right? So being a minority shareholder in Billy Reid, it sounds like they probably did the deal for equity. There probably wasn't a whole lot of cash that was outlaid. Maybe there was. I could be wrong there. But by pulling the tech, which they thought was their secret sauce, out of the D2C business, they've done a couple of things. The first one is they've allowed investors who want to fund an AI tailoring company to have something to fund, and they don't have to be weighed down by the supply chain or the physical nature of the stores or things like that. So they've created a more succinct investment thesis, and so it's going to be much easier for them to raise money. They'll probably get a much higher valuation because of the tech product. And the second thing they did by basically separating themselves from the D2C business is now they're in a much stronger position to go talk to other companies. And they say, hey, look, we're a tech company now. We've honed this in our own piece of it. We don't own that business anymore, but let us come in and work with you. Whereas I think if they had tried to make more of a B2B play, in the back of their mind, these customers are always going to think like, hey, are we inviting the fox into the hen house, so to speak? Like, why would I give my competitor more information to make their tool better? And so I think that this was a good capital allocation decision. And hopefully, by putting two profitable companies together, you make an even more profitable company. And so Billy Reid and that business should continue to do well. But then hopefully with the AI business, they've got either a large fundraise coming or a large expansion, so that they end up making much more money on that than they would have if they had just grown the D2C business independently.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean they are like two different businesses, right? One's obviously pretty high touch, custom tailoring, and one's a tech business, right? They're so different, and so I think it makes sense for them to split the two. And it sounds like they'll have more growth on the tech business and more opportunity for their investors too, which is pretty cool. So, I mean, one thing that I think is interesting, right, is kind of that dynamic of you do have some companies that have kind of a tech component of their e-commerce company, right? Like we talked about the roll-ups like Thrasio. We did a great episode on Thrasio and how they had some tech inside of that, FBA Amazon roll-up. And so, I think it's interesting to kind of debate at what point should you roll out your own technology into its own business, and probably something that, is going to continue to be considered by a lot of these larger players.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, I wrote an article last year when Convoy went bankrupt. And of course, their parts have been split up and sold. And I think that the difficulty that Convoy had run into is they tried to be a broker and they tried to sell the technology. And so it was kind of a chicken and the egg sort of situation where they needed the volume to test and battle test the technology. But by doing that, they made every other potential customer an enemy. And you look at what happened, and C.H. Robinson and J.B. Hunt went out and built basically their own version of Convoy that was better in many cases than what they had. And so the right way to do this in that case, and what I argued in the article, was that they needed to, one, have a separate company, and they need to call it something completely different, so that they could sell the tech to these other brokerages, and then they could still have their own freight business, which might have been a preferred partner. But I think that you're going to see more and more of that, where if you've developed a special sauce, you're going to call it something different, and you're going to position it as a different company, and you just may happen to have a very similar cap table to other to your brand or other things like that. And so I think that's where we see more and more of this happening.
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense. Well, I enjoyed this episode, and it was such a interesting story with Not Standard. And we appreciate everyone tuning in to this episode of E-commerce on Tap, brought to you by Source Finance. But if you have any supply chain questions, need help, whatever it may be, reach out to us. And Aaron and I always appreciate your reviews, your comments, your feedback. So please leave a review and subscribe, and we'll hear from you next time on E-commerce on Tap.